I am Darius Coleman, 32 years old, and for my entire life my family has treated me like a stain on their perfect reputation. To them, I am just a kitchen manager at a community shelter, a failure who dropped out of medical school to flip burgers for the homeless. But they have no idea who I really am, or what I have built in the shadows. Last week, after my millionaire grandfather died and left me everything, my parents tried to sue me for the money. They dragged me into court, convinced they would crush me. When I walked into the courtroom wearing my cheap suit, my mother rolled her eyes so hard I thought they would get stuck, and my father laughed with his high-priced lawyers. But then the judge looked at me and froze. "Wait," he said, his voice trembling. "The charges are against you." He took off his glasses and looked at my parents with pure disgust. "You are suing the man who saved my daughter's life." They never knew who I really was, and watching their faces crumble was the greatest moment of my life. Before I tell you how I destroyed their ego and took back my name, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who underestimated your worth. Let me know in the comments if you think parents should respect their children regardless of their income. The nightmare began on the morning of my grandfather Elijah Coleman's funeral. He was a legend in Chicago, a man who built a real estate empire from nothing, but to me he was just Pop, the only person in the world who looked at me with pride. I drove to the funeral home in my 2005 Ford Taurus. The car had seen better days. The paint was peeling, the muffler rattled like a machine gun, and the air conditioning had died 3 summers ago. As I pulled into the parking lot of the prestigious Golden Gate Funeral Home, I could already see the lineup of luxury cars. Mercedes Bentleys and my father's pristine Range Rover. I parked my rattling car as far away from the entrance as possible, hoping to slip in unnoticed. But my mother, Camille, was already waiting like a hawk guarding its nest. She was standing near the entrance, dressed in a custom black Chanel suit that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face was painted with flawless makeup that hid her 55 years perfectly. As soon as she saw me step out of my car, her expression shifted from solemn grief to pure irritation. She marched over to me, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. She did not open her arms to hug me. She did not ask how I was holding up after losing the grandfather I loved more than anyone. Instead, she stopped 3 feet away as if getting any closer would contaminate her. "What are you doing here, Darius?" She hissed, her voice low and sharp. "I told you to use the service entrance in the back. Do you see those cars? We have senators and city council members arriving any minute. I cannot have them seeing this piece of junk you call a vehicle parked next to their drivers." I looked at her, fighting the urge to scream. "Mom, it is a funeral. I am here to say goodbye to Granddad." I parked in the back row. "Nobody is going to care about my car." She reached out and flicked invisible dust off my shoulder, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "They will care when they realize you are related to us. Look at you. That suit is too big in the shoulders, and the fabric looks cheap. It is insulting to this family. It was the same suit I had worn to every family event for the last 5 years, because I refused to spend money on clothes when the shelter needed supplies." I pulled away from her touch. "It is clean, Mom. It is respectful." "Respectful?" She let out a short, cruel laugh. "Respectful would be you becoming the surgeon your father wanted you to be so you could afford to look like a Coleman. Instead, you are playing chef for drug addicts and dropouts. Listen to me clearly, Darius. Do not go stand in the receiving line with us. Do not tell anyone you are my son. If anyone asks, you are a distant cousin from the South Side. Or better yet, just stand near the back with the staff. You look like you belong with them anyway." She reached out and yanked at my tie, loosening the knot I had carefully tied that morning. "And take this tie off. The pattern is hideous. It offends my aesthetic." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back toward the entrance, checking her reflection in the window of a parked limousine. I stood there in the parking lot, the cold wind biting through my thin jacket, feeling that familiar, hollow ache in my chest. My grandfather was the man who taught me how to tie a tie. He was the one who told me that a man is defined by his character, not his clothes. But as I walked toward the funeral home, clutching the tie in my hand, I felt small. I felt like the disappointment they always told me I was. I took a deep breath and pushed through the heavy oak doors into the lobby. The air inside smelled of expensive lilies and old money. The room was buzzing with low conversation, the kind where people pretend to be sad while networking for their next business deal. In the center of the room, holding court like a king, was my father Randall. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, his posture perfect, his smile practiced. He was a plastic surgeon, and he treated his image like one of his patients, constantly refining and perfecting it until it looked nothing like reality. Next to him stood my younger sister Tasha and her husband Connor. Tasha looked like a runway model in her black designer dress clinging to Connor's arm. Connor was the golden boy my parents had always wanted. He was white, worked in venture capital, and had a smile that looked charming until you saw the cruelty in his eyes. They were the perfect trio: the successful doctor, the beautiful daughter, and the wealthy son-in-law. I was the ghost in the room, the glitch in their perfect picture. I tried to skirt around the edge of the room to get to the chapel, but Connor spotted me. His eyes lit up with that predatory gleam he always got when he saw an opportunity to humiliate me. He raised his wine glass and called out, his voice loud enough to cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Hey, waiter, over here!" The conversations nearby stopped. Heads turned. I froze. Connor was grinning at me, feigning surprise as I walked over. "Oh, my mistake," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I am so sorry, Darius. I honestly thought you were part of the catering staff. You know, with that suit and the way you are standing there looking lost." The group of wealthy friends surrounding him chuckled. My father did not defend me. He just took a sip of his drink and looked away, pretending to study a painting on the wall. Tasha covered her mouth to hide a giggle. "It is good to see you, Connor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am just here to pay my respects." Connor looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the fraying cuffs of my shirt. "Of course you are. Bold choice on the attire, by the way. Is that vintage? Or did you pick it up at Goodwill on the way here? It has a very classic poverty look." The laughter grew louder. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. I wanted to tell him that this suit was bought with money I earned honestly, unlike the funds he managed, which I suspected were not as clean as he claimed. But I bit my tongue. I was not going to cause a scene at my grandfather's funeral. "Actually," Connor continued, reaching into his pocket, "since you are here, make yourself useful. I have 3 cases of vintage wine in the trunk of my car for the reception later. Why don't you be a good sport and haul them inside for me? The staff seems busy." He pulled out his wallet, extracted a crisp $50 bill, and crumpled it into a ball. He tossed it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. "There is $50 in it for you," he said, winking at his friends. "That should cover your rent for the week, right? Or at least buy you a tie that does not look like it was made from a couch cushion." I stared at the crumpled bill on the polished floor. For a second, the room went silent. Everyone was watching to see what I would do. Would I pick it up? Would I fight back? My father finally turned to look at me, his eyes cold and warning. "Do not embarrass us," his look said. "Just take it and go." I stepped over the money without looking down. "Keep your money, Connor," I said quietly. "You might need it for bail one day." I walked past him before he could respond, heading straight for the double doors of the chapel. I could hear him laughing behind me, making a joke about how I was too proud for my own good. But the noise faded as I entered the sanctuary. The room was dimly lit and quiet. At the front, surrounded by mountains of white roses, lay the mahogany casket. I walked down the long aisle, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. It was just me and him now. I reached the casket and looked down at my grandfather. He looked peaceful, his hands folded over his chest. Seeing him like that so still broke something inside me. He was the only one who saw me. When I dropped out of medical school to pursue cooking and music, my parents disowned me for a year. But Elijah had driven his old Cadillac to my tiny apartment, sat on my second-hand sofa, and ate the first meal I ever perfected. He had told me, "Darius, these people see price tags. They think value is what is written on a bank statement. But you, my boy, you see real value. You see people. You see the soul of things. Never let them change that. Never let their blindness make you doubt your vision." I reached out and touched his cold hand. "I am trying." "Pop, Pop," I whispered, my voice cracking. "But it is hard. They look at me like I am dirt. They think I am nothing without you." I closed my eyes, remembering the last time I saw him in the hospital. He had grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man, and made me promise him something. He had said, "Promise me you will endure the storm, Darius. When I am gone, they will come for you. They will try to break you. But I have left you a shield. Just promise me you will stand tall until the truth comes out." I did not know what shield he was talking about then. I thought he meant his advice, his wisdom. I had no idea he had set a plan in motion that would turn my entire world upside down. I wiped a tear from my cheek and stood up straighter. "I promise," I whispered to the empty room. "I will let them laugh. I will let them mock me. But I will not break." I turned to leave, ready to face the vultures waiting in the lobby. I did not know yet that in less than an hour, in a lawyer's office downtown, everything I knew about my family was going to explode. I did not know that the reading of the will would be the first domino in a chain of events that would end with my mother begging on her knees and my father losing everything. All I knew was that the man in the box believed in me, and for today, that had to be enough. The drive to the law offices of Henderson and Partners was silent and suffocating. I had to take my own car because my mother refused to let my rusted Ford follow their limousine procession closely. She actually texted me the address and told me to park 2 blocks away so the partners at the firm would not associate my vehicle with their account. When I walked into the conference room, the hierarchy of the Coleman family was on full display. My parents, Tasha and Connor, were seated around the polished mahogany table in high-back leather executive chairs. They had bottles of chilled Evian water and a platter of imported pastries in front of them. There was no chair for me at the main table. Instead, a creaky wooden folding chair had been placed in the far corner near the door, as if I were a security guard or a temporary intern sitting in on a meeting I had no business attending. I sat down without complaining, crossing my arms over the chest of my cheap suit. My father, Randall, did not even look up from his phone. He was too busy scrolling through architectural plans for the expansion of his plastic surgery clinic. I heard him mutter to my mother, "As soon as the funds clear, I am bulldozing those run-down affordable housing units Dad held on to. The land value alone is worth triple what those tenants pay. It is time to modernize the Coleman brand, Camille. No more charity cases." My mother nodded in agreement, sipping her water with her pinky finger extended. "You are right, Randall. We need to focus on high-end investments. Speaking of investments, I have my eye on a summer estate in the Hamptons. We deserve a place to relax after dealing with all of this stress." Across the table, Tasha was leaning over Connor's shoulder, showing him something on her tablet. Her voice was loud and excited, completely inappropriate for a reading of a will. "Look at this one, Connor. It is 120 feet long with a helipad. We should order it today." Connor laughed, patting her hand. "Let us wait until the check clears, babe. But I like your style. What should we name it?" Tasha tapped her chin, pretending to think. "How about the legacy? You know, to honor Granddad. It seems fitting since his money is paying for it." I felt bile rise in my throat. They were carving up his empire before his body was even cold, planning to erase his work and replace it with toys and vanity projects. Granddad had spent 50 years building affordable housing for the community, and my father wanted to bulldoze it for a parking lot for his rhinoplasty patients. I gripped the edges of my wooden chair until my knuckles turned white. Just wait, I told myself. Just wait. The door opened and Mr. Henderson walked in. He was a tall man with silver hair and a face that gave away nothing. He had been my grandfather's attorney for 40 years. He greeted my parents with a polite nod, but when his eyes found me in the corner, he paused. There was a flicker of something in his expression. It might have been respect, or maybe amusement. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the table and opened a thick leather folder. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice gravelly and serious. Elijah Coleman was a man of specific intent. He updated this will 1 week before his passing, and he was very clear about his wishes. My father sat up straighter, adjusting his silk tie. "Of course, Henderson. We know Dad wanted the business in capable hands. Let us get to the distribution." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began to read. "To my son, Randall Coleman, and his wife, Camille, I leave my personal art collection currently stored in the climate-controlled vault in the basement of the estate." My father froze. My mother blinked her mouth, hanging open slightly. "That is it?" Randall asked, his voice rising. "The art collection, I hate those paintings. They are just depressing landscapes of old Chicago. Where is the liquidity? Where are the accounts?" Mr. Henderson continued, ignoring him. "To my granddaughter, Tasha Coleman. I leave my 1960 Cadillac Eldorado, which I restored with my own hands. I hope it teaches you that true value comes from maintenance and care, not just the purchase price." Tasha let out a shriek that sounded like a tire blowing out. "The car. That old piece of junk he kept in the garage? I cannot drive that thing. It smells like oil and old cigars. I wanted the liquid assets for the yacht. Is this a joke?" Connor looked at the lawyer, his face pale. "Mr. Henderson, surely there is a mistake. The estate is valued at over $100 million. You have listed some old paintings and a used car. Where's the rest of it? Where is Coleman Holdings?" Mr. Henderson turned his gaze toward the corner of the room. He looked directly at me. "To my grandson, Darius Coleman. I leave 100% of the voting shares of Coleman Holdings, including all commercial properties in downtown Chicago, the affordable housing portfolio, and the sole trusteeship of the Coleman Family Blind Trust." The silence that followed was absolute. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat there stunned. I knew Granddad loved me, but I never expected this. He had given me everything. The entire empire. The buildings. The control. Connor dropped his heavy fountain pen. It hit the mahogany table with a loud crack that sounded like a gunshot. My mother dropped her water bottle, spilling expensive water all over her Chanel skirt. Then the explosion happened. Randall shot up from his chair so fast it tipped over backward. He lunged across the room toward me, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. He grabbed me by the lapels of my cheap suit and slammed me against the wall. "You did this," he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You dirty little rat. You drugged him, didn't you? You snuck into the hospital when we were not looking, and you twisted his mind with drugs. He would never give this to you. You are a failure." I grabbed his wrists, trying to pry his hands off me. "Get off me, Randall," I shouted, refusing to call him Dad. I did not do anything. He made his own choice. My mother was sobbing now, but there were no tears, just loud, wailing noises meant to manipulate. She rushed over, grabbing my arm. "Darius, please, you have to fix this. You do not know how to manage money. You manage a kitchen. You flip burgers. You will lose it all in a week. Give it back to your father. Do not let people laugh at us." I pushed my father away and straightened my jacket. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a hammer. "People are not laughing at you because of me. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline, "they are laughing because you raised a son you do not even know." Connor stepped forward then. He had recovered from his shock and was now in full business mode. He put on his most condescending, reasonable voice, the one he used when he was trying to shark someone out of a deal. "Okay, everyone calm down," Connor said, holding up his hands. "Listen, Darius, let us be realistic here. This is a mistake, but we can fix it. You are a cook. That is fine. That is a noble profession. But running a $100 million conglomerate, that is finance. That is strategy. That is my world." He walked closer to me, invading my personal space. "If you try to run this company, the shareholders will revolt. The stock will tank. You will be bankrupt in 6 months and you will be back on the street. But I can help you. Sign the transfer of management rights to me and your father right now. We will handle the heavy lifting, and in exchange we will cut you a check for $500,000. Cash. Tax-free." He smiled, a shark showing its teeth. "Think about it, Darius. 500 grand. That is more money than you will ever see in your lifetime. You can buy a nice little restaurant. You can finally buy a car that starts when you turn the key. Just sign the papers." I looked at them. My father panting with rage, his hands curled into fists. My mother looking at me with desperation and disgust. Tasha glaring at me like I had stolen her birthright. And Connor thinking he could buy me off with crumbs from my own table. They really thought I was stupid. They thought I was just the kitchen boy. I looked Connor dead in the eye. "You think 500,000 is a lot of money?" I asked quietly. "Of course it is. To you," Connor sneered. "Don't get greedy, Darius. It is a generous offer for someone with your background." I stepped around him and walked to the table where Mr. Henderson was watching with a faint smile. I picked up the pen Connor had dropped. I looked at the document Mr. Henderson held out to me, the one acknowledging my acceptance of the inheritance. I signed my name. Darius Coleman. "I am not selling," I said, turning back to face them. "Not for 500,000. Not for 500 million. This company belongs to me now, and the first thing I'm going to do is make sure you never bulldoze those housing units." My father let out a roar of pure fury. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides. Before I could react, his hand connected with my face. The sound of the slap echoed through the office. It was a heavy, open-handed blow that snapped my head to the side. I tasted copper as my lips split against my teeth. "You are a thief!" Randall screamed, his chest heaving. "You stole this family's legacy. You are no son of mine. I will spend every dime I have to destroy you. I will bury you in court until you are begging for mercy." I slowly turned my head back to look at him. I wiped the trickle of blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I looked at the blood on my skin, then up at the man who had given me life, but never given me love. "You can try Randall," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But you are going to find out that the kitchen boy knows how to handle the heat better than you do." I looked at Mr. Henderson. "I am done here. When do I get the keys to the building?" "Tomorrow morning," Mr. Henderson said, closing the folder. I walked to the door, my cheek throbbing, my heart on fire. Behind me, my mother was screaming my name, and Connor was already on his phone yelling at someone to get a judge on the line. They were declaring war. But as I walked out of that office for the first time in my life, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier, and they had no idea who they had just declared war on. I thought the slap in the lawyer's office was the low point, but I was wrong. My family did not just want to take the company back. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to make sure that I was too broken, too hungry, and too humiliated to ever step foot in a courtroom. It started less than 24 hours after the reading of the will. I stopped at a gas station to fill up my car, my hands still shaking from the confrontation. I slid my debit card into the reader. Declined. I frowned and tried again. Declined. I pulled out my phone to check my banking app and saw a notification that made my blood run cold. Your accounts have been frozen pursuant to a court order. I called the bank, panic rising in my throat. The customer service representative told me that an emergency injunction had been filed against me. The plaintiffs were Randall and Camille Coleman. The charge was financial elder abuse and manipulation of a mentally incapacitated person. Connor had moved faster than I thought possible. He had used his connections to find a judge who would sign a temporary restraining order on my assets before I could even access a dime of my inheritance. I was a multimillionaire on paper, but in reality I did not have enough money to buy a gallon of gas. I drove home on fumes, praying I would make it. When I pulled up to my apartment building, a crumbling brick complex on the edge of the city, my landlord was already standing on the sidewalk. His arms were crossed and 2 black garbage bags were sitting at his feet. The rain had just started to fall, a cold Chicago drizzle that soaked everything in seconds. "Mr. Coleman," he said, not making eye contact. "I cannot have you here anymore." "What are you talking about?" I asked, stepping out of the car. "Rent is not due until next week." "I got a call," he interrupted, looking at his shoes. "Some lawyers. They said the police are investigating you for fraud. They said if I harbor a criminal, the building could be liable. I run a clean place, Darius. I cannot have that kind of heat." He pointed to the bags. "I packed your things. Do not come back inside. I changed the locks an hour ago." I stood there in the rain, watching him walk back into the warmth of the building. I looked at the black plastic bags sitting in a puddle. My clothes, my few books, my life. They had not just sued me. They had evicted me. I loaded the wet bags into my back seat and sat in the driver's seat listening to the rain hammer against the roof. I had nowhere to go. My friends were mostly guys from the kitchen who lived paycheck to paycheck. I could not burden them. I curled up in the back seat of my Ford, shivering under a thin blanket while the city lights blurred through the wet windows. I was the heir to the Coleman empire, and I was sleeping in a car that smelled like mildew and despair. The next morning brought a new kind of torture. I woke up stiff and freezing, my stomach growling. I drove to the one place I still felt safe, the Hope Kitchen Community Shelter. Being the kitchen manager there was not just a job. It was my calling. It was where I felt closest to the values my grandfather taught me. But as I walked through the front doors, the atmosphere was different. The volunteers stopped talking. The receptionist looked down at her desk. I walked into the break room and saw why. The small television in the corner was tuned to the local morning news, and there, filling the screen with her perfectly applied waterproof mascara, was my mother, Camille. She was sitting on a beige sofa in a studio, clutching a tissue looking like the picture of maternal grief. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Tragic Betrayal, the Coleman Family Saga." "It is just so hard," my mother was saying, her voice trembling theatrically. "We tried to get him help so many times. Darius has struggled with gambling addiction for years. He has significant debts. We believe he went to the hospital when my father was on heavy pain medication and forced him to sign those papers. My father did not know who was in the room. He thought he was signing a medical release." The host nodded sympathetically. "So you believe your son manipulated a dying man?" My mother wiped a fake tear. "I know he did. We are just trying to protect my father's legacy from being gambled away at a casino boat. We love Darius, but he is sick. He needs treatment, not a corporation." I stood there paralyzed. I had never gambled in my life. I did not even buy lottery tickets. The sheer audacity of the lie took my breath away. She was destroying my reputation to millions of people just to win a lawsuit. "Darius." I turned around. Mr. Henderson, the shelter director, was standing in the doorway. He looked tired. He held a white envelope in his hand. "Please tell me you do not believe that I said, pointing at the TV. You know me. You know I am here every day at 5 in the morning." Mr. Henderson sighed and rubbed his temples. "I know, Darius. You are the best manager we have ever had. But the board members have been blowing up my phone all morning. 2 of our biggest corporate sponsors just threatened to pull their funding if we keep you on staff. They do not want the shelter associated with a legal scandal involving elder abuse." He held out the envelope. "This is your final check. I am sorry. I really am. But I have to think about the shelter. We cannot lose that funding." I took the envelope. My hand was shaking. They had taken my home. They had frozen my money. And now they had taken my purpose. I walked out of the shelter through the back door the same way I came in, feeling the eyes of the people I had fed for years burning into my back. They probably thought I was a monster. My mother's performance had been that good. I got back into my car, but I did not start the engine. I just gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt. I had nothing left. No job, no home, no money. My family had stripped me bare. But as I sat there staring at the brick wall of the alley, a cold resolve began to settle in my chest. They wanted to take everything. Fine. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that when you strip a man of everything he has to lose, you make him dangerous. I drove to the only place they did not know about, or at least I hoped they did not know about it. It was an old industrial warehouse in the meatpacking district. From the outside, it looked abandoned with boarded-up windows and graffiti covering the brick. But inside, it was my sanctuary. I had rented the space under a pseudonym 3 years ago. It was soundproofed, climate-controlled, and filled with millions of dollars of high-end recording equipment. This was where DK lived. This was where I wrote the music that was currently topping the charts. I parked my car inside the loading bay and pulled the heavy metal gate shut. The darkness was comforting. I walked into the main studio room, turning on the low mood lights. My mixing board hummed to life. My platinum plaques, which I never displayed publicly, gleamed on the walls. I sat down on the leather couch, exhausted. I had not eaten in 24 hours. I closed my eyes, trying to formulate a plan. The sound of the metal gate rattling made my eyes snap open. I froze. I had locked it. Then I heard the screech of the side door being forced open. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Sharp, clicking footsteps. Heels. I stood up just as Tasha walked into the studio light. She was wearing a trench coat and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was on a covert mission. She looked around the warehouse with a sneer, ignoring the expensive equipment, seeing only the dust and the industrial setting. "So this is where you are hiding," she said, her voice echoing in the large space. "Mom hired a private investigator to track your car. You really are pathetic, Darius. Living in a storage unit." I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Tasha? Did you come to see if I have any other assets you can freeze?" She laughed, walking closer. "Assets? Please. We know this is just a junk room for your little hobby. I came to give you a reality check." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She let it flutter to the dirty concrete floor between us. "Mom and Dad are worried you are going to starve before the court date," she said. "And frankly, it would look bad for us if you died of hunger. Take it. Go buy yourself a hot meal, and then call the lawyer and sign the settlement papers." I looked at the money on the floor. It was the ultimate insult. They steal my inheritance, get me fired, kick me out of my home, and then throw pocket change at me like I am a beggar. "You really think I am going to sign?" I asked. Tasha rolled her eyes. "You have no choice. Look at you. You are sleeping in a warehouse. You are a bum, Darius. You always have been. You think you can beat Connor? He plays golf with the district attorney. He knows the judges. You are going to walk into that courtroom alone looking like trash, and they are going to crush you." She walked over to my desk where a stack of handwritten sheet music was sitting. It was the score for a new symphony. I was working on a piece dedicated to our grandfather. She picked up the top page, squinting at the notes she did not understand. Still scribbling these little songs, she asked, "You are 32 years old. It is embarrassing. You are never going to be an artist. You are never going to be anything." She ripped the page in half. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than a gunshot in the quiet studio. She let the pieces fall to the floor right next to the $100 bill. "Give it up, Darius," she said, turning to leave. "You were born to fail. Just accept it and let the real Colemans handle the legacy." She walked out, her heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the concrete. I waited until I heard her car drive away. Then slowly I bent down. I did not pick up the money. I picked up the torn pieces of my music. I taped them back together on my desk, my hands steady and calm. She was right about one thing. I was going to walk into that courtroom alone. But she was wrong about the rest. I was not going to be crushed. I walked over to the safe hidden behind a rack of servers. I spun the dial and opened the heavy door. Inside were documents that Tasha and Connor and my parents knew nothing about. Bank statements from accounts in the Cayman Islands under the name DK Intellectual Property Rights for songs that had generated $40 million in royalties. And most importantly, a dossier I had been compiling on Connor's investment fund. I pulled out the files. Tasha had just ripped up my music, but she had also ripped away the last shred of mercy I had for them. I looked at the torn sheet music. "Born to fail," she had said. I sat down at my mixing board and turned up the volume. No Tasha. I was born to compose. And the song I was about to play for them in that courtroom was going to be a funeral march. The Cook County Courthouse was a fortress of limestone and intimidation designed to make the innocent feel guilty and the poor feel invisible. Walking through those heavy double doors felt like stepping into the belly of a beast that had already decided to swallow me whole. I was alone. I carried a battered leather briefcase that I had bought at a thrift store years ago, and I was wearing the same charcoal suit from the funeral. The fabric was starting to shine at the elbows, and I knew the hem on the left pant leg was coming loose, but I held my head high as I walked down the center aisle of courtroom 302. On the left side of the room, the scene looked like a corporate board meeting for a Fortune 500 company. My parents had spared no expense. They had hired the most aggressive legal firm in Chicago, and 5 attorneys in bespoke navy suits were already arranging their files and laptops on the table. My father Randall sat in the center looking like a king on his throne. He was whispering something to my mother Camille, who was inspecting her manicure with an air of utter boredom. Next to them sat Connor and Tasha, both looking confident and relaxed, as if this were just a minor inconvenience before their victory party. When I crossed the bar to the defendant's table, the silence was deafening. My side of the room was completely empty. No team of paralegals, no high-powered defense attorney, just me and a pitcher of lukewarm water. I saw my mother lean over to Connor. She did not bother to whisper. Her voice carried across the quiet room, sharp and dripping with disdain. "Look at him. It is absolutely pathetic. He thinks he can represent himself. He does not even have a notepad. Does he think this is a traffic court?" Connor chuckled, adjusting his gold watch. He leaned back in his chair, draping an arm over the back of Tasha's seat. He looked at me with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Don't worry, Mom. This is going to be over before lunch. My boss plays golf with Judge Sterling every Sunday at the country club. Sterling is a hardliner. He hates fraudsters and he despises people who prey on the elderly. Once he hears the story we cooked up, Darius is going to be lucky if he does not leave here in handcuffs." Tasha giggled. "Just make sure they don't seize my new car as evidence. I want to drive it to the victory dinner." I sat down at the empty table and placed my hands flat on the wood. The wood was cold. I could feel their eyes boring into the back of my neck. They were so sure of themselves. They had the money, the influence, and the narrative. In their minds, I was already a corpse they were stepping over to get to the bank vault. I took a deep breath and stared at the empty judge's bench. They thought I was alone, but I had the truth, and for the first time in my life I was betting everything on it. All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed through the room, and we all stood up. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Julian Sterling walked in. He was an imposing figure, a black man in his 60s with graying hair and a face carved from granite. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded instant respect. He did not look at anyone as he took his seat, his black robe settling around him like storm clouds. "Be seated," Judge Sterling said, his voice deep and resonant. "The lead attorney for my parents, a man named Mr. Blackwood, who was known for destroying lives for a living, stood up immediately. He buttoned his jacket and flashed a charming smile at the judge. "Good morning, Your Honor. We are here today on an emergency motion regarding the estate of the late Elijah Coleman. We are representing the plaintiffs, Dr. Randall Coleman and Mrs. Camille Coleman, who are seeking to overturn the current distribution of assets based on clear evidence of undue influence and lack of capacity on the part of the defendant." Mr. Blackwood turned and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "The defendant, Darius Coleman, is an individual with a long history of instability. He has no gainful employment, no assets, and no education beyond high school. We intend to prove that he used his grandfather's diminished mental state to rewrite the will and steal a legacy he is fundamentally incapable of managing." The judge looked at Mr. Blackwood, then shifted his gaze to me. He did not speak. He just watched as Blackwood began his opening statement. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are tragic but simple. Elijah Coleman was a titan of industry. He built a real estate empire that supports thousands of jobs in this city. He was a man of intellect and vision. Is it plausible that such a man would leave his entire life's work to a grandson who has spent the last 10 years flipping burgers and washing dishes?" Blackwood paced in front of the jury box. Though there was no jury today, only the judge. He was performing. Darius Coleman is a man who dropped out of medical school because he could not handle the pressure. He has drifted from one low-paying job to another. He lives in a rented apartment in a neighborhood known for crime. He has no financial literacy. He has no business experience. He is by all definitions a failure who saw an opportunity to get rich quick by manipulating a dying man. I sat there stone-faced. Every word was a calculated strike designed to strip me of my dignity. He made my honest work at the shelter sound like a crime. He made my choice to leave a toxic career path sound like laziness. Then my father stood up. Mr. Blackwood called him to the stand for a preliminary statement. Randall walked up, looking every inch the aggrieved patriarch. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, a irony that almost made me laugh out loud. Dr. Coleman Blackwood asked, "In your professional opinion, does your son possess the mental fortitude or the ethical character to run a multi-million-dollar corporation?" My father looked me dead in the eye. There was no love in his gaze. There was not even pity. There was only cold, hard calculation. "No," he said firmly. "Darius has always been the black sheep of this family. We tried to give him opportunities. I offered to pay for his education. I offered to set him up in business. He refused everything. He chose a life of mediocrity. He has always been resentful of our success." Randall paused for dramatic effect, turning to face the judge. "Your Honor, I am not doing this for the money. I am a wealthy man. I am doing this to protect my father's legacy. If Darius gets control of this company, he will destroy it in a year. He is incompetent. He is reckless. And frankly, he is a disappointment. I would rather donate every single penny of that inheritance to charity than see it squandered by a son who has never earned a dollar he didn't beg for." My mother nodded vigorously from her seat, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Tasha shook her head sadly, acting the part of the concerned sister perfectly. It was a masterclass in character assassination. By the time my father stepped down, they had painted a portrait of me as a parasitical loser who preyed on the weak. I could feel the weight of their accusations pressing down on me. It would have crushed the old Darius. But I just kept my hands flat on the table and waited. Judge Sterling had been silent throughout the entire presentation. He had been reading through the thick file in front of him, flipping pages slowly. The room was quiet now, waiting for his response. Mr. Blackwood stood there with a smug smile, confident that he had already won. Connor was whispering to Tasha, probably deciding which yacht color to pick. Judge Sterling closed the file. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and pulled a microfiber cloth from his pocket. He began to clean the lenses slowly, methodically. The silence stretched on for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. It became uncomfortable. Mr. Blackwood shifted his weight. My father cleared his throat nervously. Finally, the judge put his glasses back on. He looked down at the paperwork, then looked up at the plaintiff's table. "So, let me understand this clearly," Judge Sterling said. His voice was calm, but it had an edge to it that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You are asserting that the defendant, Mr. Darius Coleman, is financially incompetent." "Yes, Your Honor," Blackwood said eagerly. "He has no assets. He works at a soup kitchen." "And you are asserting," the judge continued looking at my father, "that he is a disappointment who has never contributed anything of value to society." My father nodded. "It pains me to say it, Your Honor, but yes, he has wasted his potential." Judge Sterling shifted his gaze. He looked past the expensive lawyers. He looked past my preening family. He looked directly at me, sitting alone at the defendant's table in my cheap suit. His eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward, squinting as if he was trying to bring a blurry picture into focus. "Wait a minute," the judge said softly. He picked up a piece of paper from the file, brought it closer to his face, and then looked at me again. "The defendant is Darius Coleman, the Darius Coleman from the Hope Kitchen Community Center on 35th Street. Mr. Blackwood laughed, a short dismissive sound. "Yes, Your Honor, that is him. As I said, a kitchen worker. We believe his proximity to vulnerable populations is actually part of his pattern of manipulation. He plays the role of the saint to gain trust." Judge Sterling did not look at the lawyer. He kept his eyes locked on me. His expression had changed. The stone face was cracking. There was shock there and something else. Recognition. I slowly stood up. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I am the kitchen manager at Hope Kitchen, or I was until yesterday." The judge froze. He looked at my name on the docket again. Then he looked at my parents. His face began to darken. The calm demeanor evaporated, replaced by a sudden intense storm. "You fired him?" the judge asked, his voice low. Mr. Blackwood looked confused. "Well, the shelter let him go, Your Honor, due to the bad publicity from this lawsuit. It just proves his instability." Judge Sterling slammed his gavel down on the bench. The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed space. Everyone jumped. My mother gasped. Connor stopped smiling. "You are telling me," the judge roared, pointing a shaking finger at my parents, "that you are suing this man for financial incompetence. You are telling me that he is a drain on society," Mr. Blackwood stammered, losing his composure. "Your Honor, I do not understand. The evidence shows—" "The evidence shows nothing," Judge Sterling shouted, cutting him off. He stood up, towering over the courtroom. He reached into the inner pocket of his robe and pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper. He held it up for the room to see. It looked like a medical bill. "Do you know who paid for my daughter's heart surgery last year when my insurance company denied the claim due to a technicality? Do you know who stepped in when I was ready to mortgage my house and sell my car to save her life?" My father looked around confused. "I don't see how that is relevant, Your Honor." "It is relevant, Dr. Coleman, because the donor insisted on remaining anonymous," the judge said, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "The only name on the transfer was a charitable trust managed by a Mr. D.K. I have spent 12 months trying to find out who D.K. was so I could thank him for saving my little girl." The judge turned his eyes to me. Softness replaced the anger. I did some digging this morning when I saw the name Coleman on my docket. I called the bank that handled that transfer. And do you know whose signature is on the authorization for the DK Trust? He looked at my parents, his eyes blazing with a fury that could melt steel. It is Darius Coleman. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. My mother's mouth fell open. Connor looked like he had been punched in the gut. My father turned pale, his eyes darting from the judge to me. "That is impossible," my father whispered. "He is broke. He has nothing." Judge Sterling laughed a harsh, dry sound. "Broke. This man has anonymously funded the new wing of the Children's Hospital you work at, Dr. Coleman. He bought the library for the law school Mr. Blackwood teaches at. He has quietly given away more money in the last 5 years than this entire room has earned in a lifetime." The judge sat back down, glaring at them. "And you have the audacity to come into my courtroom, drag this man through the mud, and call him worthless. You are suing the man who has been secretly keeping this city afloat while you bought yachts and handbags." I stood there feeling the eyes of everyone in the room shifting toward me. The shame I had felt walking in was gone. In its place was a quiet, burning power. I looked at my mother, whose face was frozen in a mask of horror. I looked at Connor, who was frantically texting on his phone, sweat beading on his forehead. I reached into my battered briefcase and pulled out a single flash drive. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear. "If it pleases the court, I would like to submit evidence regarding the true financial status of the Coleman family. And I would like to play a video my grandfather recorded 3 days before he died." Judge Sterling nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Coleman, and take as much time as you need." I walked toward the evidence stand, passing my parents' table. My father reached out as if to stop me, his hand trembling. "Darius," he croaked. "What is going on?" I didn't stop. I didn't look down. I just kept walking. "You wanted to talk about value." "Dad," I said. "Let's talk about it." I plugged the drive in. The screens around the courtroom flickered to life, and as the face of my grandfather appeared on the monitors, I saw the exact moment my family realized that the game was over. They hadn't just lost a lawsuit. They had walked into a trap that I had been setting for years, and now the jaws were about to snap shut. The courtroom was silent, suspended in a state of absolute shock as Judge Sterling stood up from his bench. He was no longer looking at the legal documents or the high-priced lawyers. He was looking at me with eyes that were shining with unshed tears. "Last year my daughter needed a heart transplant." Judge Sterling began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The insurance company called it experimental. They denied coverage. We were looking at a bill of $200,000 or watching my little girl die. I had lost hope. And then, 2 days before the surgery was scheduled to be canceled, the hospital administrator called me. He said a donor had wired the full amount. The judge paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The donor insisted on total anonymity. The only name on the transfer was DK. I have spent every day of the last 12 months trying to find the person who saved my child's life. I wanted to shake his hand. I wanted to know what kind of man gives away a fortune to a stranger without asking for a single thing in return. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Last week I finally traced the routing number. And do you know what I found? DK is not a foundation. It is not a corporation. DK stands for Darius's Kitchen. And the man sitting right there, the man you just called a worthless failure, is the man who saved my daughter." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father looked like he had been slapped, but the judge was not finished. "And if you think he is just a kitchen manager who got lucky, you are wrong again." My investigation revealed something else. Mr. Coleman here is listed as the primary songwriter and producer for 3 of the top hip-hop albums released this year. He is the ghost producer known in the industry as the Chef. He has 3 Grammy nominations pending. The judge looked at my family with pure disdain. You called him uneducated. You called him incompetent. But it seems he is the only one in this room who actually knows how to build something real. I stood up slowly. The shame and the anger I had carried for years evaporated. I picked up the thick financial portfolio from my table and walked toward the bench. I did not look at my parents. I did not need to. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. I am submitting my personal financial statement to the court. My current net worth, independent of any inheritance, is $45 million. I did not want my grandfather's company for the money. I do not need his money. I have plenty of my own. I turned to face my father and Connor. I accepted the inheritance for one reason: to protect his legacy from vultures like you. I knew exactly what you would do if you got your hands on his buildings. You would sell them to the highest bidder to fund your vanity projects. I could not let that happen. My father was shaking his head, his face pale gray. No, he whispered. That is a lie. You are a cook. This is all a trick. I tossed the financial report onto the plaintiff's table. It landed with a heavy thud in front of Connor. Read it. Connor, I said coldly. You are the finance guy, right? Tell him. Tell him how much the Chef earned in royalties last quarter alone. Connor opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page. His hands began to tremble violently. He looked up at me, terror in his eyes. It was the look of a man who realized he had brought a knife to a nuclear war. It is real, Connor whispered, his voice cracking. Oh my God. He is worth more than all of us combined. But I was not done. I had cleared my name, but now it was time to expose theirs. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, my family accused me of undue influence. They claimed I manipulated my grandfather because I needed money. But the truth is, they are the ones who are desperate. And I have proof. I pulled the small digital recorder from my pocket. It was the recording I had made in the warehouse the day Tasha came to mock me. This was recorded 3 days ago, I said. I pressed play. Tasha's voice, sharp and arrogant, filled the courtroom. You think you can beat Connor? He is in deep with some bad people, Darius. His hedge fund is a Ponzi scheme. He lost $12 million of client money last month. If we do not get that inheritance, he is going to prison. And Dad is terrified because he helped Connor cover it up. The recording ended. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Tasha let out a scream, covering her face with her hands. Connor jumped up, knocking his chair over. That is illegal, he shouted, panic making his voice high and shrill. You cannot use that. That was a private conversation. Judge Sterling slammed his gavel down. Sit down, Mr. Anderson, or I will have you restrained. I walked closer to the railing. I pulled out one last document. It was a stack of spreadsheets I had compiled from the hospital's public records and cross-referenced with my father's private accounts. And as for my father, Dr. Randall Coleman, I continued. I have here bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from the St. Jude's Hospital Charity Fund directly into Connor's investment firm. He has been embezzling money from sick children to cover his son-in-law's gambling debts. My father slumped in his chair. He looked small. He looked old. The arrogant patriarch who had sneered at me an hour ago was gone. In his place was a criminal who had just been caught in the spotlight. Judge Sterling looked at the documents I had placed on the bench. His face was like stone. He pressed a button on his desk and gestured to the 2 bailiffs standing at the back of the room. Officer, lock the doors, the judge ordered. Nobody leaves this room. He looked at Connor and my father. Mr. Anderson, Dr. Coleman, I am remanding you both into custody immediately pending a federal investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. The room erupted into chaos. My mother started screaming, grabbing my father's arm as the bailiffs moved in with handcuffs. Connor tried to run toward the side exit, but a security guard tackled him to the ground before he made it 3 steps. I stood in the center of the storm, perfectly still. I watched as the bailiffs pulled my father's hands behind his back. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only fear and a begging question. "Darius," he mouthed, "help me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me worthless, the man who had slapped me, the man who had been willing to destroy my life to save his own reputation. I slowly shook my head. "I am just a cook, Randall," I said softly, though nobody could hear me over the noise. "I don't know anything about finance." I turned my back on them as the police read them their rights. My mother was wailing, calling my name, begging me to tell the judge to stop. But I kept walking toward the exit. I had walked into that courtroom as the defendant, the black sheep, the failure. I was walking out as the owner of the Coleman empire, the savior of the judge's daughter, and the man who had finally taken back his name. The doors swung open and the bright light of the Chicago afternoon hit my face. It was finally over. The chaos in the courtroom was a symphony of destruction I had waited my whole life to hear. The bailiffs were not being gentle with Connor. They had him pressed against the defendant's table, clicking the handcuffs onto his wrists while he screamed about knowing the governor. But nobody was listening to him anymore. Tasha was not crying for her husband. She was screaming at him, her face twisted in ugly, selfish rage. "You told me you were rich?" she shrieked, hitting him on the shoulder with her designer purse before a female officer pulled her back. "You said the fund was secure. What about my car? What about my house, you liar? You ruined everything." My father, the great Dr. Randall Coleman, had collapsed into his chair. He stared blankly at the floor, watching his life disintegrate. The medical board would strip his license by morning. The hospital would sue him for the embezzled funds. He was not just going to prison. He was going to die there as a disgrace. Then I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see my mother, Camille. Her perfect hair was a mess, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, her fingers digging into my suit jacket. "Darius, baby, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "You have to help us. You have millions. You can pay Connor's debt. You can hire the best lawyers for your father. We are family." "I am your mother. I did not know they were doing this. I was just scared. Please, son, save us." I looked at her hand on my arm, the same hand that had flicked invisible dust off me at the funeral, the same hand that had pointed me toward the servants' entrance. I gently peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. I did not feel anger anymore. I just felt a cold, distant pity. I looked her in the eyes and shook my head slowly. "You were right about one thing, Mom. I am just a kitchen worker. My money came from working with my hands and my heart. It is dirty money. It is not sophisticated enough for a Coleman." I stepped back, putting distance between us. "You have the art collection, remember? Maybe you can sell those depressing landscapes to pay for a public defender." I turned and walked away, leaving her screaming my name in the center of the courtroom. I pushed through the heavy doors and walked out onto the courthouse steps. The rain had stopped and the sun was breaking through the clouds. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb, gliding silently to a stop in front of me. The back door opened and the driver stepped out. He was an older man dressed in an impeccable black suit, but I knew him. He was the man I had fed breakfast to every morning at the shelter for the past 3 years. The man everyone called Old Man Jenkins, the homeless veteran who slept in the park. But he was not homeless. He was Arthur Jenkins, my grandfather's head of security and most trusted confidant for 30 years. He had been watching over me the whole time, reporting back to Elijah that I was the only one who treated him with dignity when he had nothing. "Ready to go, Mr. Coleman?" Arthur asked with a smile. I looked back at the courthouse one last time. I could see the police lights flashing through the lobby windows. I looked at the luxury car, then at the man who had helped me test my family's character. "Yes, Arthur," I said, sliding into the leather seat. "Take me to the kitchen. We have a dinner service to prep." Arthur closed the door, sealing out the noise of the city. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my mother running out of the courthouse doors looking small and abandoned on the sidewalk. I didn't look back again. I had a legacy to build, and I was finally free. The most powerful lesson from Darius's journey is that true worth is never defined by a price tag or a job title. His family saw a kitchen worker and assumed he was worthless, but they failed to see the character of the man beneath the cheap suit. While they chased status and vanity, Darius built a legacy of kindness and hidden success. In the end, it was not his millions that saved him, but the quiet goodness he showed to a stranger when no one was watching. It reminds us that the people we underestimate often hold the power to change our lives, and integrity will always outlast a lie. If this story inspired you to stand tall in your own truth, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own value. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about karma and justice.